Welcome to the CPM Customer Success Podcast, where we help Office of Finance leaders enable an exact solution to enhance their corporate performance without spending countless nights and weekends in the office. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Smetana from Nova Advisory. Nova Advisory is a 100% OneStream professional services diamond implementation partner. We help OneStream customers and prospective OneStream customers get the most out of their OneStream investments. For CPM Customer Success listeners, we now have a weekly email newsletter to keep you informed on the latest CPM Customer Success news. By subscribing today, we'll keep you informed on episode releases, including customer success stories, OneStream interviews, and capabilities to keep you up to date about OneStream's unified platform for finance. You can check that out now at Nova Advisory's website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success Podcast newsletter today. Workday is increasingly positioning adaptive planning as a close and consolidation tool and a unified finance solution. So today we're going to pressure test that story and give finance leaders a practical framework to evaluate Workday as compared to OneStream. And to guide this comparison, we're back with Dave Collins, who's the Director of Strategic Alliances at OneStream Software, and a multi-time CPM Customer Success Podcast guest. So welcome back, Dave. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And actually, this just in, I was promoted yesterday. Now I'm a senior director. I'm not sure if that had to do with age or just it was time to move me up to the next strata, if you will.
Well, congratulations, Dave. I
Thank you.
will reframe as Senior Director of Strategic Alliances. Regardless, it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
CPM Customer Success podcast. We've done a number of OneStream capability comparisons to other CPM products in the marketplace that we often see our customers consider. And so today we're going to continue that comparison with OneStream and Workday. So let's dive into it, Dave. So when finance leaders are thinking about and hear this kind of marketing information that Workday has planning and close and consolidation unified, what outcomes are they really trying to achieve? As they consider these things.
I think the challenge that Workday had initially when they acquired Adaptive was adaptive close consolidation. I was actually with a partner at the time who was a Workday partner as well as a OneStream partner. And I asked the question because they posted on their website, and we do consolidation as well. And I said, well, adaptive is all about planning. How are you doing close consolidation with a planning solution? You're probably missing several key elements that are necessary to do a full consolidation process, much less a close process. And they agreed, and they eventually took that down off the website. They then pivoted to let's use Workday as an ERP to do the close process. That was actually changed to a modular approach to leveraging adaptive to do close consolidation, where they actually built in some additional functionality back in late 2024, if I'm not mistaken. We've not seen many customers as yet that have been using that or have we competed against that. They're still largely talking about ERP. That could be a sales enablement or education issue inside of Workday. And I've talked to friends of mine that partner with Workday. They still believe that the ERP is the right way to go. So all of that said, the challenge you wind up running into versus what we do with OneStream is you've got these disparate, fragmented, modular applications that then have to be brought together in some way, shape, or form to suit the complete needs of Office of Finance. So that complexity as compared to what we do in our single application fueled by the platform-based approach is often why a customer will choose us versus Workday.
And so I think back to prior episodes, Dave, where we've talked about OneStream as compared to other CPM products, and we've talked a lot about technical debt. in the context of financial systems. So as we compare Workday and OneStream, where does that technical debt kind of build up within that kind of ERP modular approach?
Well, it's all about data movement for the most part. So if I have separate applications and I have the ERP and they have capabilities that are in even different cloud environments. As an example, Adaptive Insights, which is the former Adaptive Planning, is actually hosted in Amazon Web Services. That's different from the Workday data center approach for ERP. So I have to move data to and from web services in some way, shape, or form. Last I heard from a friend of mine who was actually doing quite a lot of work with Adaptive, getting data to and from Adaptive is solely about text file based approach, so not even a direct connection, which can be problematic. You've got stale data. I have to have somebody prepare the data file and then prepare the consumption of that data as well. There's another product called Workday Prism that is largely used for bringing in operational data, doing some data science exercises, some operational reporting. That's hosted in a different system as well. And so technical debt winds up becoming the actions that it takes a human to create the integrations between those systems and ensuring that it's all working properly. As you said, we've done a number of these sessions. At the end of the day, what winds up being the biggest differentiation point is we don't require that. We bring the data into the OneStream application at some level of detail, and then it's used for various business functions and for AI and for analytic reporting. So there is no data movement. There's solely the technical debt of bringing the data into OneStream, and you're going to have to do that with any solution you have. There's no movement of the data. There's no additional technologies you have to purchase. There's no additional human-based resources that you need to have to create all of that integration and ensure that it's working properly.
Got it. So, so if our listeners are thinking about maybe they come from a Workday ERP type footprint, and they're thinking about adaptive planning versus OneStream's capabilities, what should they be considering and thinking about kind of a true unified platform capability versus maybe what they're coming from?
Well, with Workday, and this is true with NetSuite and SAP for that matter, if you look at Gartner's review of them, they don't consider that any of those three actually fit in the closed consolidation space. And what I mean by that is the non-planning sorts of functions that are typical in the Office of Finance. If I'm a Workday customer, meaning I'm using their ERP, adding in adaptive is a thing to do. You can work with adaptive, you can create the integrations between the two, but then for everything else, you're either buying another product or you're leveraging another module within Workday for all of the performance management function. And so the OneStream based approach, if I have lease accounting, we have partner based solutions, or I can create a solution for OneStream Financial Close or the financial close process, which now has journal entry management across multiple ERPs. All of that is built into the OneStream platform and therefore the OneStream application. So it's an ease of deployment, ease of use possibility that you don't have when you have to go from application to application, module to module. That's really the key differentiation point. Now, do we lose to adaptive? Sure. Sometimes that's just a function of the politics internally with regard to, we're a Workday shop and therefore we're using Workday software no matter what. And yes, we understand we're going to have to do all this integration. And sometimes if you're dealing with an IT function, they're quite happy to do the integration because it's stuff for them to do. It's a more traditional legacy-based approach, however, and we've moved beyond that.
Okay, so if one of the finance leaders or someone in IT considering the two, and they're faced with a demo, right? You're heading into a demo. What kind of questions should they be asking the software providers to kind of help expose whether the solution's unified or if it's really kind of stitched together in a modular approach?
I think the big question I would ask is, where am I now? So if I'm looking at something on screen that is a plan, a budget, a forecast, tell me where I am. Tell me where the data came from. Tell me how I got to the point where I'm now surfacing that content on the screen in front of me. Walk me through the picture. What's the data flow diagram? Now, that's not necessarily something that an accountant is going to ask, but anyone that's in there in support of the software evaluation needs to dig into that sort of thing. As you look at the Workday architecture from ERP to actuals consolidation to the close process where I'm dealing with journal entries, workflow, all of that sort of thing to operational sorts of use cases, there are going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 data movements required. So I think the simple question is, where am I now? Is the best one to ask, because that'll get to the heart of what module or what application you happen to be in at that time. And the other one is, pretend like you're from Missouri. Show me. Show me how the data came in from the ERP level, the source level. Show me how the data got to the point where I can calculate an actual versus a budget, because that's going to reveal that modular approach where the modules are not together. I mean, I actually, we at OneStream don't like using the term module. We say solution instead. Some of that is political in nature. I think of our solutions as modules that you plug into the application, as opposed to being separate, distinct modules where I have to do the integration between. I can download a solution like OneStream Financial Close from our solution exchange and plug it into the application. To me, that's like plugging a module into my car, or back in the day, plugging, a tube into the TV when the tube actually stopped working, or a tube into the radio, or a chip into something to make that something work. I mean, back in the day when we had cell phones that the memory was removable, you're plugging that little memory module into that application that is a cell phone.
Yep, and I think of as I think to that demo kind of example, I would encourage prospective customers to look at things like, well, what if you acquire a new organization? Well, that requires like finance and accounting both understand. Well, that requires probably new entities and maybe has new products. How does that kind of ripple through the system, both on an actual standpoint and a planning standpoint? Because
Yeah,
there are
exactly.
data movements.
Yeah, I mean, the modular based approach that the other vendors have, if I acquire somebody, I now have to spin up another application for that somebody. I have to worry about the integrations between the applications for that somebody. Whereas with OneStream, with our extensibility, the dimensional model, I can add the entity structure, I can add the product structure, the customer structure directly into the business model that I already have. And now I can timestamp that as well, so that come July 1st, for example, when the new co debuts, it has the newly acquired content available. And I have a before and after approach to it. So I can see reporting before July 1st and post July 1st in two different ways, the old co versus the new co.
Yep, perfect example. So let's kind of pressure test the close and consolidation approach between the two organizations. So if you think about just consolidations requirements, can you think through like what might be underestimated during an evaluation that a prospective customer might be thinking through in the context of how you consolidate in the Workday ecosphere versus OneStream?
So depending on the approach that Workday is taking, whether it's the ERP or this capability that was introduced in late 2024 to Adaptive, you might have a volume issue. So if I look at the Adaptive example first, Adaptive was a software company that prior to becoming part of Workday was really focused in on small to medium sized businesses. Workday is really focused on that, but also upstream into the larger organizations. One of the things we've been hearing is that there are challenges with regard to volume when you're doing anything with Adaptive. So when I look at use cases around the close process where I might need to do transaction matching, account reconciliation, we're actually down into volume of detail. It could be a daily transaction stream that needs to come through the system. Can I do that inside of the adaptive based close and consolidation solution, or do I have to do that within the ERP? Transitioning to their ERP based approach, if I'm not a Workday ERP shop, do I have to have Workday ERP deployed? And the answer is yes, because that's where you do the consolidation on those larger use cases. And again, same approach for SAP, where I have to have a small deployment of SAP, in this case, a small deployment of Workday. That means I have to have resources that understand how to support that, maintain that, as well as deal with the integrations that need to take place. So there's not one way of approaching it as we see it, as we read the literature, as we read their documentation. There are multiple options for you. Options can be a good thing. However, in the case of deploying software, you'd like to have the one way of deploying the application, and our approach is the one way. And we're industry leading. The most recent Gartner quadrant came out in the last few weeks or so. I just looked at it this morning. It was emailed around the OneStream ecosystem, and we've now moved to be the absolute upper right as far as the quadrant chart is concerned. Now, still close to, but we've passed up Oracle, we've passed up Tagetik from Wolters Kluwer, according to Gartner. That same relationship exists with all of the other reviewing bodies out there as well. So, the other thing, and I think we've talked about this on previous webcasts, we wind up seeing a lot of valuations beginning with, not ending with, but beginning with, let's look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And if you don't see a Workday in the quadrant at all, which is the case for close and consolidation, that's concerning. If you do see it, is it in the upper right-hand quadrant, which is where all the good vendors are, according to Gartner, versus those that are trying to be good? I think that's something that really needs to be examined.
Okay, so let's stay on kind of the controllership side of the house, Dave, and talk about auditability because it's a strength of OneStream's. So if you're kind of a controller, you're on the accounting side, you know that you've got an audit coming, but you want, before you invest in a solution, you want to know and validate the auditability of the solution. What types of things could they ask? What should they consider when they assess like a Workday versus a OneStream?
Well, go back to the show me. Show me, provide me with a record of transparency from when the data came from the underlying source system all the way through to the final report. We provide an ability where I'm in the final report, I can click on a data value, drill down on it, and see all of the movements, the changes that have taken place. When I say movements and changes, it's not movement from application to application, it's movement from something being pre-consolidated to being post-consolidated and all of the things that take place along the way. I have intercompany activity. I've got, not in any particular order, I've got intercompany activity I need to deal with. I've got currency conversion I need to deal with. There could be journals that are affecting change on ultimately the value that's being posted for revenue. All of that within OneStream is captured because we built the platform from the ground up, considering that first and foremost. We have a whole series of reports built into a solution on Solution Exchange that can be downloaded, plugged in, use that term modular again, plug in the modular reporting that allows an auditor to get everything that they need right out of the reports. And they can pursue it by doing that drill down capability so they can see the transparency from start to finish when any given data point or data points make their way through the process. In the case of Workday with Adaptive, I have those data movements that I have to be concerned about. I remember back in my consulting days in the Oracle world doing a massive deployment with all the data movements, something as simple as an audit log of this many data points left this application, went to this other application, and were either consumed or not consumed. That didn't exist. We had to create that. I would suspect that that's the case with Workday. And so a big question would be, show me your pre-built reporting that the auditors are going to use to get through that process as quickly, as efficiently as possible. Because the big goal from a controllership standpoint is have the auditors come in, do their work, and get out. I've actually seen where customers that I've worked with will bring in wooden chairs to the room that the auditors are in with no padding because they want them to be uncomfortable. They want them to get their work done and get out as quickly as possible. We provide that. And the big four, little four, all of the audit firms that do audit are familiar with OneStream. They're familiar with the approach. They're familiar with the reporting that's been being provided. It helps allow them to get in and out quickly.
Yep, and I encourage prospects assessing these platforms. Just look at a full close cycle. Like you said, you touched on intercompany and foreign currency translations and reportability in local versus US GAAP or kind of a corporate views. Awesome. So we talked a lot about kind of integration that I wasn't actually aware that Workday solutions bounced between cloud server farms. So that was interesting. But I want to kind of maybe spend a little bit more time on integrations and scripting. It sounds like there's a text file almost based approach from our understanding. What's the risk that an approach like that creates versus OneStream's approach?
Well, so I think going direct to source, or at least having that option, is the best approach for a number of reasons. I may need to drill to that operational data to get a better feel for what happened to diagnose a problem. I might want to use an AI component that we provide to do anomaly detection so that I can see if there was anything happening from a fraudulent perspective throughout that life cycle of that data or that particular business function. If I'm moving data files back and forth, I don't have a place to go to. And there's a good friend of mine that works for a technology company that works with Workday, another software company, who's walked me through what they've created. So many Workday customers will buy this other technology so that it will ingest the text files, essentially make a data warehouse like structure available that then the various Workday functions can go read from. Why should I have to buy a piece of software? Why should I have to create a platform to do that? Why doesn't the software do that inherently? That's always been our thought process. So in the case of OneStream, we have customers that are loading daily stock keeping unit, just above stock keeping unit, bill of materials levels of detail into the OneStream application that eventually does close consolidation, FP&A, and so forth, but it enables them to do a level of operational reporting analytics that you typically have to move off to a different product or a different platform or architect something with Snowflake or a data warehouse to achieve. So when it comes to that ability we have to unify, it's not just unifying the functions, it's unifying the data, and there's really no limitation to the amount of data you can bring in. We're leveraging Microsoft Azure as a SaaS function. It's one SaaS function. It's not multiple SaaS functions that I have to worry about moving the data back and forth across. I'm limiting the amount of risk because auditors typically are going to look at each data movement and ensure that those data movements are working properly, because that's where you can get a lot of break fix that's necessary. In our case, the data comes in once, only once. It's now available for any of the functions in the OneStream application. So I think that's a huge advantage operationally speaking versus what Workday does and others as well.
And I think about a quick question to kind of test that would be prove to me you're not creating an additional reconciliation that I now have to perform, because that's going to hit both an accounting function or an audit a finance function.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about kind of acquisitions and growth. We touched on that a little bit earlier, but for acquisitive companies and most large organizations that are considering OneStream would fit in that category, I would say. So as companies grow or they acquire businesses, what can break first in terms of their data? Is it dimensions, hierarchies, workflows, integrations, all of it?
All of it. So, starting from the dimensional model, I obviously will have an account structure, and I'm supporting multiple accounting functions. I might have my strategic plan, which can be quite small. I'll have my forecast process, which is a bit bigger than that. I'll have my budget process, which may be a bit bigger than that. And then I've got the actuals, which is bigger than that. Not the actuals in the sense that we're replicating what's available in the ERP, but from a close consolidation perspective, what accounts do I need to fuel the reporting that's necessary if I'm publicly traded on an outbound basis? That can be fairly detailed, or I may want to have small, medium, large size levels of detail. So if I acquire an organization, and if you think of, like a PE Portco kind of situation, we used to be owned by KKR or largely owned by KKR. So is Gibson Guitar. We're a software company. They're a manufacturing company. They manufacture guitars. The business model is quite different, yet it was all in a single application. How is it we're able to do that without getting into the technical details? This extensible dimensionality, very big phrase, if you will, for allowing a dimensional model similar to what's available in relational today to have changeability. So there's a term within dimensional modeling, slowly changing dimensions, quickly changing dimensions, meaning that if I look at a dimensional combination, before I talked about July 1 versus prior to July 1, we can timestamp an account structure to be different post July 1 versus pre July 1. We can timestamp and or stamp because something is one scenario or another, meaning it's actual, it's planned, it's budget, it's strategic plan. We can actually have different account structures within the account dimension, different entity structures within the entity dimension, and more. We can have those structures be different for a business function. We can have them be different from a business unit perspective as well. So as I add a business unit and I need to integrate that business unit into the application, it's a matter of typically looking at what you have and then either adding a branch on the account structure that might be slightly different than the other account structures, or simply leveraging the account structure that is already in place and then expanding it, extending it. It's a really unique way of, in a single application, seemingly having multiple applications. The maintenance of it is incredibly easy by comparison to having multiple applications. You typically would have to have a master data management solution, metadata, master data, somewhat the same, that is a library of stuff that then pushes out to each of those physical applications. The challenge is you don't typically know if the dimension model works until it gets to the application. So in this hub and spoke based approach, you're pushing data out and then the application either fails or it doesn't. The OneStream based approach is to unify all of that together so that I have that one place to go to model the business. And again, it can be variable based upon business unit, based upon business function, like a scenario play. It can be different based upon time, different based upon account. Lots and lots of variability available. Very, very powerful.
So lots of flexibility. And when you said extensible dimensionality, those not familiar with that term, maybe we can spend a little time thinking about a finance, let's call them like a finance leader of FP&A, versus a controller. They can have different views of their business, depending on their needs. But let's kind of stay on that flexibility, Dave. So during an evaluation, how can buyers, prospects of OneStream versus Workday really think about and evaluate true flexibility in the application, the platform, versus just assuming that it'll be there?
Well, short of building it, I think the best approach is to work through references. Talk to customers that have actually been there and done that. Talk with partners such as yourselves that have been there and done that with regard to deployment strategy. We have a tremendous reference network. I think we're above 1,800 customers now worldwide. And we publish a book with contact information in it for the customers that are willing to speak with any customers. It's a big book. There are hundreds of pages in it. There are thousands of contacts in it. And oftentimes in the sales process, the sales rep will simply, at the right time, when it's fully qualified, hand the book over and say, feel free to reach out to anyone you want. I think these are the 5 you'd really want to focus in on based upon my understanding of your use case. But again, feel free to reach out to any of them you want. Most customers are in that book. Some customers, that's just not the way they operate. They don't want to expose themselves. They don't want to provide potentially sensitive information to the competition, so they stay out of the book. But again, thousands of names that I can reach out to and have a conversation about how I'm leveraging OneStream today. And it's also indexed by where the customer was before. If they were using Workday or they considered Workday, that information is available and they can have a conversation about it. I prefer it's like Gartner versus the Gartner customer choice process. Gartner customer choice process is a customer actually talking about their experience with a technology, and Gartner simply gathers all of that and publishes it. I think your best bet is to work with those, converse with those who have been there and done that. Our partner network is certainly one way to do that. Reach out to Nova, have a conversation with Nova about their experience. OneStream can do that as well by way of the references. OneStream can do that by way of our, we have a team of folks that actually look at the before and the after transformation team, business transformation. They'll look at where a customer was, what technology they were using, where they are now with OneStream, and what they've gained from that on a value perspective. So I think there's a number of different ways of doing it. I would stress that you want to get to the folks that, as I mentioned before, have been there and done that so you can gain from there.
Okay. So let's now think about and help our audience with roadmap. So we've focused a lot about on closing consolidations. We've talked about planning. I think quite a few listeners and finance and accounting leaders would be pretty excited to have both of those solved for. But as they, as they're considering a OneStream versus a Workday, let's assume that they've advanced to that point where they've solved close and console and FP&A. What would be on their roadmap beyond that? And how does OneStream's approach different from a Workday as they continue to expand and need additional capabilities?
Great question. So the platform-based approach has largely provided us with an ability to solve for anything. Why is that a good thing? It's not forcing us to create a different application or a different technology, which then needs to be maintained, administered, deployed by the customer in concert with the partner. That solution exchange that I mentioned before allows OneStream and OneStream partners to produce something that is worthwhile, post it to the solution exchange, and then a customer can download it, and in many cases for free, plug it into the OneStream application. From a OneStream standpoint, some solutions that are not free typically delve into AI because AI is going to increase the amount of resource that's required in the Azure environment from a data perspective and a compute perspective. And the way we price function, if you will, is based upon the typical performance management needs. If I'm going beyond that, getting into operational use cases or AI use cases, there's an additional charge for it. It's not been an issue with any customers that have taken advantage of, for example, AI, because there's so much value coming from it. So when OneStream, and I think a great example is the new journal entry manager. OneStream created a function called Journal Entry Manager that's a solution, GEM for short, that you can download and plug in, that allows the business user, the finance user, to reach out to potentially multiple ERPs, bring that data in, and then do in OneStream a journal entry process that then gets pushed out to each of those ERPs. It's captured in OneStream, it's kept in OneStream as part of the close process, but it's pushed out back out to the ERP so that you can have it there as well. So any direct ERP-based reporting is then in sync with the OneStream application. All we had to do was create the solution. We didn't have to create another application that you purchase. We simply added that solution to Solution Exchange, taking advantage of existing capabilities in the platform. So I think the platform-based approach gives us a workbench to create value that can then be extensible. We talked about extensible dimensionality. Extensibility also goes into the function level, where I can bring a function into my application, extend the capability of the application quite easily. And again, in many cases, for no software cost.
Okay, let's talk about we've touched on Workday customer experience. So let's kind of come back to that now, Dave. So if you're a listener, you're already a Workday customer, what are some of the top questions they should be asking to avoid, if they're looking to expand, the use cases like you've touched on, that they could avoid choosing the familiar Workday, path over what's really the best fit for their organization needs?
Well, one of the things they may observe is that they have different people to speak with. I've got the ERP team for sales and support and probably customer success. I've got the adaptive team for sales and support and customer success. I've got the Workday Prism team from an operational perspective. So I'm having to juggle multiple points of contact, which immediately tells me that I have multiple functions that are disparate, fragmented, underlying. The With the question of roadmap, if I was a Workday customer, I'm probably used to seeing roadmap be unlike what I mentioned before. It's, oh, there's a new module that you can buy that you can plug into your Workday world. Well, it becomes a function of purchasing it, potentially having a different team that is selling it, supporting it, different contracting. There's a lot of fragmented business touch that's going on between that customer and Workday. That to me would be indicative that I'm in a complex world. I want to potentially look for something that's simplified, and OneStream provides that. There's a customer success person, there's a salesperson. That's basically it. If you have need for support, you call support. They support every function that's available within the OneStream application, within the OneStream platform. So there's tremendous simplicity with the OneStream based approach from a support standpoint that I think you'll enjoy versus perhaps what they're seeing with Workday.
Yeah, so I'm curious about your experiences, Dave, about organizations that maybe have stayed within a platform. What do you hear when you're kind of brought in, you talk with them that maybe they regret by having made a decision to stay within a single suite?
I think it's the I stayed with the label Workday in this case because I knew the label. I knew what to expect. Change is challenging. People don't embrace change generally, or humans don't embrace change generally speaking. So there's a bit of risk with making that decision to change. And again, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, that's where I think talking with a customer who's done that, they've moved from Workday to OneStream, they've moved from perhaps myriad solutions underlying to OneStream, and they've unified everything together. I think that's the best way to go to overcome that fear of change. Um, that's one side of it. The other side of it is the shop-based approach. In IT, we're an SAP shop. In IT, we're a Workday shop. That mentality tends to be more within the office of CIO than it is in the office of finance. And the office of finance goes along for the ride. I think the office of finance needs to have a bigger say in technology decisions because it impacts them most directly. How do they complete the tasks that need to be completed on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis? They need to really get a feel for, almost like back in the day, you'd buy a car, you'd kick the tires, you'd open up the hood, you'd look at the engine. That's where that reference process, I think, comes into play.
Okay, so it's an office of finance leader, or even if, IT is involved as well, which would generally be the case with both. If they're going through a demo process of different solutions, what kind of demo traps might they fall in when they compare Workday to OneStream?
So demo traps that
Then maybe they go through a demo
falls
process,
into.
they're assessing, they see the Workday products. Maybe it's some questions they could be asking to make sure they flesh out and truly understand what they might be buying.
Well, I think again, it boils down to show me in detail how you got from here to there. Show me where I am right now. Is this a different web service? Is this a different data service? Is all of this together and unified? Because ultimately, when you see a demo, it tends to be more toward the reporting side where I've brought everything together. And Workday is the same. In order to do reporting from an actual budget operational perspective, you have all those data movements that eventually make their way into the reporting structures that are inside of Workday ERP. If that's what they're showing you, it looks like it's all together and cohesive. But I want to see the journey from before. Show me, I guess a great question would be, okay, I now want to go change a number and I want to see the impact on that final report. Show me all the steps that I have to go through to make that happen. And I want to pick the number. So I'm going to go change that number over there, not that one over there. Once I make that change, walk me through the calculation process, any data movement process that's required to then surface it in a report. I think that's one way of getting to the heart of it that is easy to do.
It's really focused on the outcome. the solution result they're looking at versus a checklist of items within the software. Okay, so let's kind of start closing up, wrapping up, Dave. So any kind of advice you might provide to prospective customers in this debate of OneStream versus Workday? Any kind of key questions you'd suggest that they ask of both providers?
Find out if the technology that's being proposed was an acquisition or built organically. If it's an acquisition, there's going to be technical debt associated with the integrations. I think that's a big thing. Ask how many customers are actually doing what you're proposing I do, and when can I speak with those customers? One's an open book. OneStream development is all from the ground up. We took our time initially with decisions we made to stay away from a disparate application or a fragmented application-based approach. The other vendors we compared to tend more toward, I'll go acquire that technology, I'll plug it in, I'll make the integration work. So find out, in 2024, when they introduced a way to do consolidation in Adaptive, okay, I want to talk to customers that are actually doing it today. Show me the evidence that indicates I'm not going to be the first one or within the first 10 that are doing this, because there's a lot of risk associated with that.
That's a great place to wrap up, Dave. Well, thanks so much for joining again, and we
You're welcome.
wish the best of luck to those going through this evaluation process. Have a good day.
Awesome.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of CPM Customer Success. Reminder to check out the CPM Customer Success weekly email newsletter to stay informed of the latest CPM Customer Success episodes and OneStream news. You can check that out now at the Nova Advisory website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success Podcast email newsletter today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of CPM Customer Success.